moderator, Jervonne Singletary.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Cannabis in the Black Community, sponsored by the New York Urban League Young Professionals. I really do hope that thus far this has been an informative and impactful event for you all. And we're going to continue right on into this really engaging conversation. My name is Jervonne Singletary, and as Lakim just said, I'll serve as your moderator for today. I'm really thrilled to be here to talk about really one of my favorite subjects in the whole wide world, cannabis and economic opportunity. I started my journey in 2016, and no one took me seriously. I would get blank stares when I would say things like, we're about to have $1 billion opportunity at our doorstep, and let's think creatively about an infrastructure so folks like us could benefit since we bore all the burdens from prohibition. I couldn't get meetings with anyone, and I worked in politics, and my colleagues were looking at me like, go sit somewhere. But now times have really changed, and New York and Virginia and New Jersey have all recently legalized adult use cannabis, and every day more states continue to follow suit. But our people still aren't really being benefited in this industry. It's still estimated that Black and Brown folks only own about 4% of legal cannabis businesses. So today, really want to center equity as the state continues to roll out adult cannabis and the ways, and let you all know the ways young professionals can get involved. So I now want to introduce our panel. We have Tiyahnn Bryant, who's the CEO and founder of Roll Up Life, which is a technology-based logistics company, and he's also the vice president of the New Jersey chapter. Sorry, New York's still in my head. New Jersey chapter of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. We also have Shekia Scott, who's a cannabis equity mentor and consultant and former director of equity and outreach at the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission. And I'll let Chris Alexander introduce himself. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Tiyahnn first, and I want him to go into what his origin story is and why he does this work. I'll then pass it to Shekia, and then I'll ask Chris to introduce himself and answer those two questions. Floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiyahnn Bryant. As she said, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Roll Up Life Inc. I'm also the Vice President of the New Jersey chapter for Minorities Medical Marijuana. I jumped into the cannabis industry officially in 2018, but I started down a rabbit hole around 2016 when I graduated college. Noticing the legalization path on the West Coast, I attended college in Idaho. Granted, Idaho is a very Republican state, but the border states of California, Washington, and Oregon were all some type of legal, and were pushing towards full legalization. And at that same time, our home state back at home, New Jersey, passed the Jake Honig law, which was the law that enacted the medical marijuana policies here in the state. Just noticing the trajectory of what was going in the business, you could just see that a flourishing and robust market was on its way to the East Coast. So I dashed home, and before I even jumped in and tried to start a business, I just wanted to learn more about the cannabis plant, more so smoking, right? So what, more so cultivating, more so than just a dispensary. Like, what is actually the cannabis plant, and how does the entire supply chain from seed to sale operate? And doing my education, we started to notice several gaps in the logistics and supply chain aspects of the cannabis industry, which is why we developed the Roll Up Life platform to basically assist medical patients who were lacking that accessibility to the dispensaries here in the state of New Jersey. At the time when we started doing this, we only had six that had to supply 100,000 patients throughout the state of New Jersey. The average drive time was probably 90 minutes between each of the six. We're up to 17 now, but we're up to that much more patients. So there's definitely a logistical challenge here in the state that we wanted to just step up and make sure that we could fill it. And that started down a rabbit hole. 2018, we officially registered Roll Up Life as a company, and next thing I know, we were getting press here, press there, just making sure cannabis was easy, accessible, and readily available for the people who needed it. And as we're starting to expand into the recreational market, we definitely hope that we can continue to make waves and strides throughout the cannabis industry. My name is Tiyahnn again. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Our next speaker.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shekia Scott. I am a Boston native, but I now, as of July, reside in Philadelphia. So Pennsylvania is not yet a legal state, only decriminalized, but coming from Massachusetts, which is going into its 5th year of legalization, I started on this path, working in city council for Boston's first city council president as her director of policy. And at the time, one of the, I call her one of the greatest commissioners that I've run into, sent over her equity policy as Massachusetts was moving into their commission that will oversee the regulation of legalized recreational market. She sent over her policy, and instantly I was like, this is amazing. I've never seen a policy like this centered around equity. I need to go work there. And I transitioned out of my office and went to work at the commission as the director of equity and community outreach. And in that position, I focused on creating Massachusetts' first statewide equity program in the nation. Oakland was the first citywide, Massachusetts was the first statewide. And this program provides a bunch of opportunities for those who are disproportionately impacted, including 29 cities and towns that we designated as areas of disproportionate impact based on arrest rates. Those are being reconsidered at this moment. And this provided entryways, four pathways of entry, 1, entrepreneurship, 2, entry-level positions, 3, core-level positions, and then 4, which I think a lot of people forget to talk about, is ancillary opportunities. Say, and I know many of us in this meeting have heard this, but those who got rich during the gold rush weren't the people that were looking for the gold. It was the people that sold the picks and the axes. So ancillary businesses are huge, and they're going to be more prevalent as we move into legalization around the nation. So I focused on that, also on outreach, so developing outreach programs, defining equity for the state of Massachusetts, and then working to understand what we need, not just in terms of programming, because I want to make sure that we understand programming is not equity. Equity is a threaded identity of the entire industry. And so as we talk about medical marijuana, we must not forget that equity needs to live there as well. And so that's, where I came from and my main role. And now I'm grassroots organizing in Pennsylvania so we can get ready for upcoming legalization as that happens, hopefully in the next year or so.
I'm in Pennsylvania now, so we should just connect offline because I think we have a lot to talk about. Chris, would you mind introducing yourself and then telling the folks a little bit about your origin story and what brings you to this? Chris, you're still on mute. You're having a little bit of... we'll let you work that out. I promise I will give you an opportunity to speak and pass the mic. So I wanted to go to jump to the next question, and really, because this conversation should really focus on and center around equity and social equity in cannabis, but a lot of folks have very different ideas of what that means. So I want to turn to you guys and say, how do you define social equity in cannabis, and what's your ultimate vision for it? Whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll jump in. Equity, like you said, is defined so many different ways, but I want to make sure, and when I first introduced our equity program, the first thing I wanted to make sure is that we differentiate the meanings of equity and equality. They are not the same thing. They do not mean the same thing. And equity does not get us, equality does not actually get us to equity. So we have to make sure that we're not confusing those two terms, and that they're not synonymous. But equity is, to me, and how I defined it for Massachusetts, is undoing through practice, through programming, through legislation, through funding. And there's a more defined meaning of this, but undoing the harms that were committed intentionally by the structures that be, and making sure that we provide we meet people where they are. That's what equity essentially is. And so those disproportionately impacted, of course, should have bigger accessibility programs or legislation tailored to undoing the harms that were already created. And so that's the main point of equity, is making sure that we are meeting and bringing up the people that are the most disproportionately impacted, and then meeting everybody else where they are at the levels of impact, because we know those most disproportionately impacted are not the only ones impacted. And with saying that, keeping in mind that equity is not to disclude anyone, it's not to exclude anyone. And just because you are not the most disproportionately impacted doesn't mean that you are not impacted, and doesn't mean that you are not a part of overall equity. I don't know if oh, go ahead.
Definitely. Just to piggyback off of what she's I was definitely going to start off with that huge point. There's a major difference between equality and equity. Equality just means that everyone has a fair chance, right? Even though it may not be the same, equality essentially is just everybody has a fair chance. Equity is everyone has a fighter's chance. Everyone has what they need to actually be in the game. Not just, okay, well, yeah, you can go apply, but the application is $30,000. You might not have $30,000. That's not equity. So when I was just talking to the Cannabis Control Commission here in the state of New Jersey, oh, sorry, that's the CCC in Massachusetts. The Cannabis Regulatory Commission here in the state of New Jersey on Thursday, in advocacy for my Minorities for Medical Marijuana group, they were asking us, how can we make this industry more equitable? And that was definitely one of the first things that I said was, well, applications for the average person is not probably something they can do. Other states have made social equity applications very easy to apply for. And here in Jersey, we don't even technically have a social equity applicant. We have criterias that one must fit in. You must have a legally registered minority-owned business with a state-certified MBE license to even be considered an equity applicant or a minority a business applicant. So there's just so many crucial details to hash out when it comes to making this industry more accessible to those who have been damaged by the war on drugs, who have been ravished by unfair political practices, and who've seen their careers lifted upside down due to some petty jail time for a nickel or a dime bag. So in terms of trying to make this industry fair and equal, it definitely starts out with giving someone a fighter's chance, not just a chance to sign a list, but a chance to actually get on the court and try out. If you need some sneakers, you might not be able to have some sneakers. Well, here's the sneakers. That's equity. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I definitely believe that's what we should be trying to transition into, getting some type of funds together for people to get this together. But also, equity comes in the form of education. We have so many people who are trying to dive into the cannabis industry. And now let's just fast forward this. This was something I had to have to talk with the CRC, and I'll let this be my last tidbit on this one. Let's just say we do rush a bunch of people through these social equity applications, and people get their licenses, right? Bad business practices are not what they have to worry about. Predatory loans are what they have to worry about. Um, Learning how to manage staff, payrolls, what is this and what is that. So there's still some type of gap in terms of creating these businesses fully equitably. So we just have to make sure we can get in the education as well as making the industry easily accessible for everyone. But that's all I have to say on that one.
Chris jumps in. I'm sorry, Chris. I know you want to introduce yourself. You finally got in with us.
Yeah. It was a frustrating couple minutes there.
I'm just gonna put out the language that I used in terms of Massachusetts. It's jargony, but the recognition and undoing of unequal, discriminatory, and or preferential preferences and treatments through various methods to prevent the continuation of an inequitable status quo And then there's other language that we use here, acknowledging and rectifying injustice practices and treatments that are aimed towards preferential and discriminatory methods towards certain demographics. And once these practices and treatments are addressed, various tactics must be put into place to cease the inequitable status quo.
Completely agree. So much about the conversation needs to really center on education, funding, simplifying the process so that points of entry and barriers to entry are no longer existent or not so high. I sometimes think that regulators did this intentionally to leave folks of color out. You know, they set this framework up so way that it's not accessible, but very valid points. Thank you both. Chris, you are with us. Thank you. Yay.
I am here.
Please.
I am here.
Mike
Oh
Stewart,
man,
please introduce yourself.
that was the most frustrating. I felt like struggling with technology, like my grandma. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Alexander. I currently work for the largest Black-owned cannabis company in the world, Viola/Village, founded by Al Harrington. I handle government relations and policy for them. But prior to that, I was a counsel in the New York State Senate. That I was a policy coordinator with the Drug Policy Alliance. I built the New York legalization campaign and wrote the New York legalization bill, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. Honored to be here with trailblazers, and excited that you all are having this conversation. And thank you for reaching out to have me here. Y'all have been hitting all the points. I could hear you, but I couldn't speak. And I just, I'm giving the praise hands and clapping. But one thing I would say, just following up to Shekia's point, equity is market design. When we break it down, we talk about access and opportunity, because those are kind of the two things that are tangible, and they seem easier to digest for policymakers and for folks who are trying to figure it out. But really, it's based in how your market is designed. And we're fortunate in New York that we have an opportunity right now, based on not just the legislation that we were able to move forward mostly intact, without compromise, but also because of the current structure, the limited nature of our existing medical market actually creates an opportunity for us to really expand and make sure that the new businesses that we're trying to bring into the space have an opportunity to succeed and to become thriving businesses. And Tiyahnn, sorry pronunciation, is that correct, Tiyahnn? Tiyahnn, my bad. I completely agree that it's about sustainability. It's about building businesses that can last. And we've taken, when we talk about the New York bill, I'll go into some of the steps that we tried to take here. But, the experiences that you all have had and that y'all are speaking to are 100% correct. It's about market design. It's about making sure that folks have real support to move through this. Because as you said, it is intentionally challenging. It's intentionally designed to not allow us to succeed. So we've got to, be 2 steps ahead. So, but great to be here.
Thank you. I think you bring me into my next question, honestly. As the devil's in the details, right? New York State passed this bill. It is a great framework for what is going to happen, but a lot of the intricacies and the things that people who want to start businesses need to know are going to be in the regulatory aspect of that. And now that it's out of the hands of legislators, right? What are some things that we need to continue to do to push on regulators to design a system that has access points for minorities?
And here, and Chris, I know this is your ballpark, so you're the New York native, but I saw that New York, what I call took a page right out of Massachusetts book and learned from our mistakes. So I'm kind of going to list a few things, but then caution against some things that we as people need to look out for and continue doing. One of those is focus on your municipal levels. The state can only legislate so much, and then the municipalities are going to be able to enact their own city and town level programs. They're going to be able to enact zoning laws, and so you have to stay, tied into that as well. So as people see the state legalizing, they think, oh, New York, this is going to apply everywhere. But it's not, right? Because in Massachusetts, we had some towns completely opt out. of recreational use, or but not educating their constituents that they can still go outside of their city or town and open a dispensary. So just making sure that you are able to delineate between your state and your city and your town, and what those differing rules are between those two. I don't know if New York, and Chris, help us out here, it built into their legislation a more a cohesive structure. Massachusetts kind of didn't. We kind of was like, at the state, okay, we're not going to have any licensing limits. We don't have a number of licenses that the state is going to give out, but each city and town does, right? So you have to think about that. In Massachusetts, we also have something called host community agreements, in which your city and town is going to be able to apply a tax of its own on top of the state's tax. So you have to think about that as well and understand what that looks like. And this was one of the biggest barriers for people in Massachusetts getting a host community agreement, because Jervonne, like you said, even you were in politics, you couldn't get meetings with people. These people have to go meet with their mayor. They have to go in front of their zoning boards and file for appeals and variances. And people are like, I've never been in this process before. How am I supposed to know how to navigate this? Luckily, I built a program to help them navigate that. But if you don't have that, you're not going to know where to begin. So I'm just going to list off some amazing things that I've seen in terms of New York's policies and what you should pay attention to. The first thing is that they're going to create a 5-member cannabis control board to oversee and regulate the industry. Know who those 5 people are. Get yourself into those positions. When up, and they might be I lost my word, but they might be put into those positions by your governor. Ours were decided by our governor, our attorney general, and our treasurer for those 5 seats. We had a 5-member board as well. But if you can, nominate people, petition to your governors or to your attorney generals or whoever's going to create that 5-member board. Put people in those positions. We had a 5-member board. 4 of those people were white people that voted no against legalization. How is that possible? But your mission is equity. It makes no sense. So think about that. Think about that control board. They're going to have to build out their staff. Luckily, one of the commissioners sent her policy to me, and I got into the board as soon as it started. It was officiated in September of 2017, and I started in May of 2018. So I got in right at the beginning when they were just hiring, and there's going to be major positions that they're going to hire for to fill out that board. So think about that. Think about getting your people in there. Think about writing policy and making suggestions to this board about their regulations. Our regulatory board goes back and reviews our regulations every 6 months because we're trying to be transparent and equitable. And so every 6 months we rewrite the regulations. We go on listening tours and listening sessions across the state to make sure that the people are informing those regulations. And so just kind of like pushing and using your civic action to be involved, but also securing yourself those positions and understanding how this industry is going to play out. I think that's the main key is just making sure that you're getting into. I was gonna highlight some things, but I think we'll come to that later. But understanding, the taxes, the issues, understanding the difference, again, like I said, between the state legislation and then the regulatory body, and then also your city and your municipality rules and regulations as well.
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely learned a lot from the states who've come before us, including Massachusetts. One such thing is we limited actually the local input. It's a completely state-run program. Local input will come, though. You're absolutely right, Shekia. Local input will come in the form of zoning and time and place restrictions. We've prevented the ability of municipalities to, barring, them opting out, which is a similar process in place as, for them to opt out for alcohol sales has been in New York law for a long time. Barring them opting out, they can't, really restrict market activity beyond that. So if they opt out, then so be it. But if they, if they don't opt out, they have to allow businesses to operate. They can place time and place restrictions, i.e., no sales on Sunday, etc. But they can't go beyond that. But they will absolutely have a role to play as it comes to zoning and getting our dispensaries and other facilities cited is always going to be a challenge, particularly in a city like New York, and cities across the state. But the other part, I mean, absolutely agree. The control board in New York, 3 of those seats are going to be appointed by the governor, and then the legislature, the leaders of the legislature of both houses each have 1 appointment. We have been, working to influence who the governor is going to appoint to make sure there are folks who are aligned with the mission. We are less concerned about the legislature because they've been such excellent champions, particularly Assemblymember Crystal Peoples-Stokes and State Senator Liz Kruger this whole time. And so, we've been, pushing and trying to learn, making sure that folks have real access and there's not, barriers and hurdles, along the way. But I absolutely agree. Information is key. You got to be in touch with what's going on, and the regulators are going to have a huge role to play. This is a whole new state agency that we've created, right? So it's basically a whole new SLA, right? A whole new state liquor authority called the Office of Cannabis Management. 5-person control board that determines licensing and does final approval on regulations. There's going to be a separate staff run by an executive director, also appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. And we'll also have an outside, kind of inside out advisory board, which is really the place to provide input. They're the folks that are going to be tasked with making sure that our regulations stay up to date, that make sure that people continue to have input. But there's 2 other kind of pieces that I just want to add of significance, that we've created a separate, similar to your role, Shekia, we've created a separate position charged with managing our social equity program, but also have made sure that role is kind of independently accountable to the people, right? Where that position is appointed by the board, by 4 members of the board, meaning that the legislature has input on who becomes our chief equity officer, our CEO of OCM. And that person is going to report back to the legislature on the offices, on their activities and on their efforts to meet our 50% social equity goal that's in statute. So that's a huge thing for us, because oftentimes, these positions can get swept under the rug, these goals get swept under the rug, and there's nobody to hold accountable. And so we've made sure there's a specific position that is accountable directly to the people to make sure that we do what we set out to do.
That's good. That's dope, because we understand how sometimes the regulators can have the best intentions, but without accountability, you never really get to the end game. And without the appropriate data, tracking, metrics, you're not going to get to what you need. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that the legislature has retained so much control. Earlier in the design of cannabis legalization, it really was the governor's ball, right? And he was going to do it in his own way and silo that role. And so I'm really glad the legislature was able to come together and make it something so that the people can benefit. So thank you for that. I now want to go to Shekia, and I want you to dig into a little bit what I know you were getting ready to about what Mass got right and what they got wrong as New York really starts to drill down on this thing.
So I think Mass, honestly, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I think Mass got a lot of things right on paper. There's not a lot of things that happen in practice, especially with policy and legislation, that look like what you think it looks like on paper. But Massachusetts has done a lot, and a lot of this is synonymous with New York. So I'm going to read down some of New York's, but I'm just going to tweak it so that it reads for Massachusetts. So we allow home grow up to 12 plants per household. We allow cannabis delivery, and we have exclusivity periods and priority statuses for those who are disproportionately impacted, or I don't like to call them social equity applicants, just because that kind of silos them and kind of creates this bottleneck in competition between them that we don't want. We have social consumption lounges, which also requires legislators to move on it, but we have allowed that and voted that in. We have our cannabis control board. We have elimination of penalties up to an ounce. We don't have automatic expungement. We have a terrible expungement process, to be honest. So that is mistake number 1. We have a 17% tax at the state level. New York has 13. We have a 3% tax at the city level, so a 20% tax overall. That's very high. The good thing about the taxes is they're supposed to go into a fund that are reinvested into communities. And then I oversaw a separate group, as Chris was kind of mentioning, a separate group of, is called the Citizen Review Board, that I worked with closely to give me recommendations on the social equity program, but also where those tax reinvestment funds should go. Those funds ended up going to the police. Why? I have no idea. So we have to also continue to rethink what public safety means in this industry, right? And when we're talking about police, right, we're going to have security at all of these dispensaries. So that's giving more money to the police. So just thinking about that, I think that's somewhere where we kind of got iffy. We didn't have a set amount of license types that we were going to give to those disproportionately impacted. And I think that was a great thing at the state level, but we also made the mistake of not initiating a 2-to-1 ratio from the beginning. So if you're not going to one, and along with this, we also gave medical dispensaries priority. But in Massachusetts, our medical marijuana industry is predominantly white male dominated. So you're already starting off in the hole, you're chasing equity instead of establishing it from the beginning. That was, to me, the biggest mistake we could have made, because now we are almost 5 years in. We have a lot of stores open, over 150, and we have 8 of them that are social equity applicants for economic empowerment, or MBE, MDE. So I think those are the biggest mistakes we made. Also, there's no funding. When in my role, I tried to create grants, and then that gets conflated of like, if we as the control, the Cannabis Control Board or Commission can fund any of these businesses. So you really have to start off with startup funding. You can't just say, hey, when these businesses get going, we'll reinvest those taxes, because now we're paying for our own demise in a sense. You disenfranchise me, and now I have to pay into something and wait for you to reinvest in me. That doesn't fly with me. And so I want people to also be aware when people are saying they're going to initiate reparations through this type of industry or tax reinvestment, to make sure where those tax reinvestment funds are going, what board is overseeing them, who is making recommendations, one, to the board, but also, or the commission, but also to your legislators, about where that money should go. And I think those are the main issues that Massachusetts made. But other than that, we have a lot of things baked into our regulatory practices and our language that does center, equity at its core, but also not siloing equity into its own little thing, right? I felt that in my position that, oh, they think equity is just this thing over here, when it's baked into the entire industry. So your licensing department needs to know what equity is. They need to be reviewing applications in an equity lens. Your investigations team, we have investigations, enforcement, and licensing. They kind of work as a trio. They all need to know what equity is, and it can't be one person. I was a one-person team for 2 years until I got someone onto my team, and you need to build it out as if it's its own. And like Chris said, New York is doing its own separate board and identity, because it is a huge job. There's no one person that can do this. And so just really funding it, my budget for 3 years was $300,000 for an entire state. I don't know how I was able to manage to do the things that I was able to do, but that is despicable. So we need to just think about how we're funding it, how we're looking at equity, and then a number of those other things that I listed. And the key one to me is starting the industry off equitably so that you're not chasing equity down the line.
Me to my next question, the legacy market. So much of what we're talking about is startup businesses, but we have so many entrepreneurs who've been in this space before it was legal. The OGs that took all the risks, growing, processing, distributing cannabis to folks like us. And so how do we adequately incorporate a legacy market that does not have tax returns, does not have a bank account, that may not have some of those quote unquote business things that we look for when we're trying to license a reputable business? How do we actively incorporate that market?
I think the first thing would be actively how in Jersey we have a really good expungement program, like an automatic expungement program. Secondly, that experience is still experience. This is something that we were talking about with our Cannabis Regulatory Commission. They're trying to figure out ways to include them too. That experience is definitely something that can't go unnoticed in this industry, and that grind and the hardship that they went through, sacrificing their livelihood, their time, family time, and all of that is something that can't be ignored. So when it comes to including people in the legacy market, um, first things first is we have to make them feel comfortable. A lot of them are still like hiding, like, wait, can we? I don't trust it. Like, I've been somewhere, so the first thing is making them feel comfortable, and secondly, we don't know who's well off or not from the legacy market, because there could be some people involved in the legacy market that can just and breeze through this application process, right? So how it comes in the form of how we're going to judge this money right here, right, in certain aspects. And lastly, and I'll let Chris go because Chris seems like he has a very detailed answer for this one. But for me, in the last one, to get people involved in the legacy market, would definitely be showing them how to network fully, showing them how to leverage their knowledge, showing them how to step out of that shell that they're so scared to come out of, because without them, there's no us, honestly. So getting them to embrace full legalization is something that all of our states are going to need. We're going to still have black markets. There's nothing you can do about that. But if we could just make it smaller, and welcome more people inside the industry, through some type of legislation, through some type of forgiveness program, or anything of those sorts, would definitely be fully necessary to get people involved in the legacy market.
Absolutely agree. And it's funny because when there was so much of a a stigma associated. I mean, it's still stigma associated with cannabis use, but with sales specifically, right? So when the activists would get going, the distinguishing factor would always be, well, I'm not a drug dealer, I'm not this, I'm not that, and we have to, as you said, is we got to recognize these are our experts, right? And we've got to find ways to incorporate them. The initial programs in Colorado and Washington State that were, focused on excluding, where they not only legalized but also and did not legalize without looking back, meaning didn't clear records. They also prohibited those folks with records from coming into the space, right? And so with that history in the initial states that legalized, as we move forward, it's clear, as we've all talked about, it's clear that we've got to clear these arrest records and make sure that even as we're clearing them, even still, if whatever's left cannot be used to deny folks access into the space. But the other point that you're making about training and development, I mean, what we did in New York is that, as tied to our social and economic equity program, is create an incubator program where we can, meet folks where they are, have a broad community outreach, meet folks where they are, and then give them the tools that they need to be successful in this process. And I think that's crucial. Because I think that we'll find a bunch of experts who are experts at growing the product, or have our distribution are experts, or have tons of customer of a customer base, but they need some other tips about how to stay compliant, how to maintain compliance in this highly regulated market. But I would say something else, and this is for the regulators, is that oftentimes they look at the illicit market as a nuisance, and the truth of the matter is if we don't successfully incorporate the illicit market, our programs, our industries will fail, because we're not going to ever get to a point where we're getting enough market share to make sure that, you know, we're raising the revenue that we need to raise, to make sure that we're actually impacting public health by putting a cleaner product out there on the streets. I mean, all these other goals that we have requires the incorporation of the illicit market. We don't know the answer because, you know, it's also, people also have to want to come in, right? They have to want to participate, which is hard for a lot of folks. But what we can do, at least as from the regulatory side, is make sure that the doors are open, that there's support should they want to make this transition. And, you know, and then there's going to be some, you know, I don't want to say it like this, but there's going to be some, like, you know, they have to want to do it. There's going to be some type of willingness on their side to also step in. I know that there's been definitely talks of amnesty programs and whatnot, but even outside of the amnesty program is just recognizing the expertise, which I think is more central to anything.
That's exactly what I was, sorry, Chris, were you done? I'm sorry. Okay, that's exactly what I was going to add on, that in Massachusetts, we had an idea. Actually, Dr. Marion McNabb, formerly from C3RN, she was one of our social equity program vendors, and her idea was some way to acknowledge life experience, right? But one key thing that I think we're leaving out, we're all saying it, but we're not saying it in this way, is language. Language is super important. Because you're going to start to see people saying, oh, we're looking for horticulturists and we're looking for botanists and we're looking for, like, they're not going to call it just your everyday language that you're used to in your everyday market, right? And so people are going to see that and they're going to be like, oh, I don't have that degree. I didn't go to school for that, but you have the life experience. And so how do we recognize that, acknowledge it, and then incorporate, reward people for that experience that they have, without saying, oh no, you've been growing for 15 years, but now you got to go to horticultural school. Like, how does that make sense? So we have to really, really think about the language that we're using. I know that at the beginning of this, there was even a controversy about calling it cannabis, right? Because there's not a lot of people that go on the street and like, I'm trying to buy cannabis. It's like, that's not what the, and I call the illicit market, the black market, the legacy market, I call it the market. It is the market. It's the only market we've ever known, right? Until states started legalizing. And so I think just recognizing that this is the market itself before we just think, oh, the legalized market is the market, gives us a better handle on incorporating it into the legalization.
I agree. Language is key, and we have to make that it's accessible for the people who want to enter into the industry and they have so much skills and experience. How do we acknowledge that and bring them to the forefront so that they have a role in this space? I want to drill down a little bit more outside of into cannabis entrepreneurship. You know, folks are looking to start businesses. What are things that they need to know? Talk a little bit about the capital needed to start cannabis businesses. Just give them a little bit about the breakdown of the cost of running a cannabis business, if you would mind.
To do it in like sizes, because here in the state of Jersey, we start off at the micro level, then we shoot up top into the largest vertically integrated operations here. So the lowest hanging fruit, can everyone hear me clearly? Because I know someone told me I had to turn on my volume. The lowest hanging fruit here in Jersey would be one of the micro licenses. It's one of the few businesses that don't really have a license cap on them. Our full cultivations licenses are capped at 37. We'll be handing out full dispensary licenses on a need base determined to your application. But micro licenses, this is what many people are considering the equity licenses here in the state of New Jersey. Again, like I said, we don't have that the actual equity license. But even that's just a 2,500 square foot facility, depending on if you're doing cultivation, manufacturing, delivery, whatever, it caps at 2,500 square feet. But even that, you might need
We can hear you just a little low.
I think you just muted yourself.
I'll just jump in. I can't tell you.
Is that better?
There you go.
It was my beats. I'm sorry. I was trying to
I got a bunch of kids running around down in Florida. But so initially, like even for a micro business, it sounds crazy, but you're looking at about $500,000 to start. You gotta get your dispensary built out. The application process itself is gonna probably run you somewhere near $100,000 in the state of Jersey just for the application writer plus applying for it, and then you got to have to physically have the space on your application, right? So while these companies aren't even active, you're paying rent month after month already. So like here I would say like even for one of the smallest licenses, we're looking towards about $500,000 just to put a number on it. And as the licenses get bigger, you can imagine how much money you're going to need to start to move towards what you're doing. Here at Roll Up Life, our our capital raise was $3 million. So that should just give you a scope of what how capitally intensive this industry is, and that's not equitable, but just to give you a number, guys.
You know, I think I agreed. It ranges startup costs. I would say, I mean, there's not obviously in New York. We just passed, and we're waiting for regulations to be formulated. Before regulations are formulated and approved, first we need the board to be seated. The board has to be seated, or the language, the talk that everybody's using, that the board will be seated before the end of session as two, or the chair of the board has to be confirmed by the Senate. So that ends on June 10th. So we're hoping maybe 2 weeks we get the board, and then 60 to 90 days we get the regs. So hard to say exactly what it's going to look like. You all can go to cannabis.ny.gov, which is the official site of OCM, where information will be rolled out. What I can say in terms of startup costs, is that, one thing that we did do in legislation was require that the application costs be nominal. Before, for the medical round that we did in 2014, 2015, total cost was probably around $2 to $3 million for that application. We awarded 5 licenses and then awarded 5 more in subsequent years. But what we've done at least is to make sure that the cost to entry to the state won't be a barrier for folks. There'll still be all those other costs, but at least on that side we tried to address it. What I would say similarly is that we will have those different licensing levels in New York, allowing for a micro license, the space limitation, but likely end up around the same place, 25 to 5,000 square feet. Unlike Jersey, though, our micro, it does allow you to be vertical. I'm not sure if the Jersey license allows you to be vertical. Yeah, our micro is a vertical license. And then we'll have breakdowns on our dispensary license, our cultivation, our processing. Those are all individual singular licenses. We prohibit vertical integration outside of the micro license and the existing vertical ROs, our existing medical companies. But everybody else will have to choose which aspect of the industry you want to participate in New York. And so maybe that's a good tip to start with, is to start thinking about what piece you want to be involved in. If you are somebody who has experience with retail, or you've owned or operated a restaurant, or you know the restaurant business or whatever, maybe you think dispensary is probably the way to go. If you're somebody who has access to a large amount of land and you have the green thumb or whatever, then maybe you're thinking cultivation. But there's, within the micro license, I don't want to kind of disparage it too much, because within the micro license there's definitely opportunity for folks who want to run on a smaller scale, who operate who make bakery, who make baked goods, who make cookies, who make drinks or whatever, to run a small business that can be incredibly profitable with very limited overhead. So I don't want to discourage folks from being interested in that. But yes, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go after one of those big licenses. My company, we're licensed in a couple of different states, and each endeavor is a couple of $100,000.
I'm just going to add on here, definitely the range of money seems appropriate for Massachusetts industry as well. But what Massachusetts, one thing that we did well is we incorporated a co-op license. And so there can be us four, you can be from wherever you are in our state, and we can come together and make a co-op business so that all of that funding isn't just on you as the individual or just your business. So we could have you as the cultivator, Jervonne, and Tiyahnn. We could have you as the dispenser, and me as the researcher, and Chris as someone else, and we can all band together. One of us has to have a farmer's type of license through the state, that kind of thing. We also eliminated application fees for those who are part of our social equity program. We have annual renewal fees that we slashed in half for all of those that are part of our social equity programs. And you just have to meet one of 3 criteria. And I want to mention that our social equity program is not based solely on marijuana. So we've opened it up to any drug conviction, because the war on drugs is much more massive than marijuana. And so if you meet those qualifications, you bypass all of that initial funding that you need to get through the application process. Then we have a mandated seed to sale tracking partner that we eliminated the cost for that for those who also qualify for this program. So thinking about that, I think the co-opt option is one that makes it less, makes it more financially feasible. But we know that everyone doesn't want to go into a co-opt or have that kind of group, but it is something that kind of can eliminate that. We also created those 2 delivery and social consumption license types that we made exclusive for those groups for the next 3 to 5 years. And so gives them enough time to generate that capital. But also there are some issues there with feasibility of those license types as well, but working on it.
I want to add 2 real quick for folks. I want to make sure folks understand New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, the states that we're referencing are limited license states, which means that for those folks who are familiar with New York, just like back in the day, the taxi medallions, right? You have a medallion, you got a lottery ticket, basically, right? Like they hold value themselves. And so winning a license in New York or New Jersey or Massachusetts or some of these other states that are coming online, understand there's a limited amount of them. That piece of paper alone will have value. And so, think of going through this application process as, really your foray into winning something of great significance. And so you put all your energy into it.
Just one quick thing, Chris. Massachusetts has no state limit.
Not the state, well, but the locality, by virtue of the locality.
There's certain limits, 3 licenses of certain types, and MSOs have certain limits that we capped them at, but there's no license number that Massachusetts will give out.
Yep, gotcha. Yep. So, so what these papers have incredible value. Understand that these applications are lengthy, are complicated, and what's super important is that as Shekia was saying, is that you pull your team together to kind of fit into the puzzle of what is being demanded. So you're having the experience that you need, that you make sure that you're thinking about your connection to the community, you're thinking about where you want to be sited and how you want to operate as a business in that area. All that stuff is going to be a part of the process. And so, really, I encourage folks to take that application process very seriously, and think about building out a team that can, help you get through that process.
The thing I want to add, I know we have to move on, is for those in our social programs or that qualify, we do have a pre-certification application. So the application is completely truncated for them until they get to a level of provisional licensure, so that we can eliminate some of those barriers to them accessing the industry.
That's exactly what we need to have. So we only have 4 minutes left now. Sorry, guys. And I really want you all to just wrap up with your final thoughts. What does this audience need to know as New York State, Jersey really moves towards having open adult use cannabis shops, dispensaries, cultivation, the whole 9? What are the last jewels you want to impart upon the audience?
For Jersey, it's a definite going to be really competitive. We have the lowest tax in America. It's just our sales tax. So we're at 6.625, and then your municipality can add up to a 2% excise tax. So the highest it'll go is 8.8625%. Unfortunately, we do have a heavy municipality involvement where you have to get a letter of intent from your municipality to operate in there. We don't have a legitimate social equity program, so you'll have to somehow, some way, try to get an MBE license, selling merchandise or something, to at least get your sales together, develop your brand. But the biggest challenge here, I'll say, for Jersey is because it's so fresh. We don't have so many operational cannabis businesses here. Like, granted, like I said, we only have 17 dispensaries, but that's not 17 different companies. It's like 8, 6, something like that. So it's gonna be like hyper competitive to get here in the state of Jersey. So like you guys said, just build a really formidable team, know exactly what you want to do, and be able to explain it well. Show your community how your community will benefit from your business specifically. I'm not talking about from cannabis. I'm talking about from you, exactly what you're going to do to provide for your community, and like how you benefit, how you're going to hire people, stuff like that. Just get your legitimized plan together, and it's easier to find funding with the legitimate business plan backing you, with the legitimate team backing you, because right now people of color are definitely who the cannabis industry is starting to be geared towards, but also be wary of predatory partnerships. And that's my last note.
I think my key things are to make sure that you are, that equity doesn't get siloed into a program. Equity is not a program. Regardless what anyone tells you, regardless if the program is called the social equity program or not, it is more than a program. It applies to every part of the industry that we're talking about, whether that's in medical marijuana or not. And whatever state you're in, especially if you're not in a legalized state, look at the legalized states, look at what they're doing and how they're going about it. Pick out things that you feel are appropriate for your state and start that legalization process yourself, right? Bring these to your city councilors or to people who are your community leaders and start just having those conversations among yourself, because this is the first industry in a really long time that was created by the people. This didn't come from legislation down. It came from us up. And now, right, we're seeing ourselves kind of built out of it. And so we need to make sure that we're staying on top of that and keep pushing, you know, at the city and the state level, just from the grassroots perspective. And then also, don't forget about your ancillary opportunities. Everyone is not going to be an owner and everyone is not going to be a worker. We can own, right? But we can also own where we're just selling ashtrays, where we're just selling shirts, where we're selling merch, where we are accountants, where we're all of these businesses that are going to start up, guess what they're going to need? CPAs. They're going to need lawyers. They're going to need people who paint the shop. They're going to need HVAC facility people. So just keep that in mind. You have skills already that are transferable to this community. Into this industry, and you can make bank. I know money's not the biggest thing, but you can also impact your community in that way too, and show people the direction to go that way as well. So those are my 3 key takeaways.
Have a conversation about ancillary opportunities. I hope they open that up for the next session, because there is so much opportunity there. Chris, you have our final word.
I'll be
some jewels.
super quick. I mean, New York, it's an exciting time. It's an exciting opportunity for us here. And, you know, what I would say to folks who are in New York, who are interested in New York, there is a ton of information out there. Look at what is happening in other states. You know, look at, you know, as folks said, like, start to identify what you want your business to be, what niche you want to be in, how you want to participate and serve, because all of that is here right now. And, you know, as the information keeps coming out, just stay on top of it. I mean, we're gonna get things rolled out, as you know, in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, and a lot of stuff is still being figured out right now. So stay engaged on the advocacy side, keep your eyes open on the regulatory side, and then just keep learning. And I think we can, you know, at the end of the day, as much as we've built and the framework that we put together, the opportunity we put together, if people aren't ready to take advantage of it, it's going to fail. And so we want folks to be excited. We want folks to be ready to jump in and go after these licenses and you know, make our New York market incredibly strong. So.
Thank you all. This was a really great panel. I had a pleasure, joy hosting it. I really appreciate you all for such an informative and engaging conversation. I hope the audience got something a little bit maybe out of this. But you know, like everyone said, as pre-planning is super important. Getting your ducks in a row is super important. Knowing who the folks are in the room and pulling a seat up to the table if you don't have one are all the key steps. I think that you all just need to know if you want to get involved in this industry. So with that, I will close out. Like Tim just said, head back to the intermission to turn up with DJ Matrix. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, guys.